The New Orleans Saints finished the 2022 regular season with a 7-10 record and missed the playoffs for the second consecutive season. And given they missed the playoffs, and given they had a 35-year-old Andy Dalton starting at quarterback for them for most of the year, they weren't really discussed a whole lot by the media, and they were pretty much out of sight, out of mind. But as crazy as this is going to sound, the Saints and their fan base have a lot of reason to be excited. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and say Super Bowl in the Bayou or anything like that, but the mistakes that were made in 2022 from everyone are very, very correctable, and you can easily convince yourself that if a few games here or there goes a different way, well, we could have been talking about a 10-win team instead of a 7-win team. Now, I realize you can do that with every team every year, but they still pulled out 7 wins with Rashid Shaheed and Traquan Smith as the number 2 and 3 wide receivers for this team, and they still pulled out 7 wins despite finishing 22nd in points per game. And as we know, New Orleans addressed the quarterback position in a big way this offseason. And because of the Derek Carr signing, a lot of people were quick to mark this team as division champs before the season even starts. But how will the Saints do in 2023? Well, we're going to break that down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing one of the biggest reasons the Saints went 7-10 last year, and believe it or not, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the quarterback situation. I mean, that played a little bit of a factor, yes, but not as much as you'd think. This team had 25 turnovers in 2022, which ranked 27th in the NFL, and despite their defense playing pretty good all year, they finished 30th in turnovers forced. So when you are at that much of a disadvantage from the turnover rankings, not just on one side of the ball, but on both sides of the ball, a lot of that's going to dictate how your season goes regardless. And for the Saints to finish 7-10 despite having a turnover margin of -11 honestly is an accomplishment in itself. And two of the most frustrating losses the Saints had last year were in weeks 2 and 3 against the Bucs and Panthers. And in those games, the Saints outgained the Bucs by nearly 50 yards, but lost the turnover margin substantially as they committed 5 turnovers to Tampa's 1. And obviously, anytime you commit 5 turnovers in a game, well, it doesn't take a lot to figure out that you are probably going to lose that game really by default. And the following week in Carolina, they committed 3 turnovers to Carolina's 0, yet outgained them by over 130 yards. And in these 2 games alone, New Orleans had a turnover margin of -7, and one of the turnovers in particular was just bad luck for the Saints, as Frankie Louvu of the Panthers made a hell of a play to force a fumble from Alvin Kamara, and the ball bounced right to Marquise Haynes, who scooped it up for a touchdown. And the Saints ended up losing by 8 points, and sometimes that's how it goes, meaning how the ball bounces. But the Saints lost 11 fumbles last year, which ranked 24th in the NFL, and that's not something that's unfixable. So if the Saints clean even just a few of these turnovers up over the course of a season, well, they're going to add up in a big way. And another big difference between the 2021 Saints and the 2022 Saints is the 2021 Saints forced 25 turnovers compared to the 14 turnovers the Saints forced last year. And as we said, that ranked 30th in the NFL, meaning the 14 turnovers, but what should be remembered is this is a very good defense. Now, they did lose David Onyemata and Caden Ellis to the Falcons in free agency, and even Shai Tuttle to the Panthers, but they brought in Nathan Shepard and Kalen Saunders to try and fill these voids. And former first-round pick Marcus Davenport went to the Vikings in free agency as well. But this defense still has playmakers like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, and of course, Marshawn Lattimore. And believe it or not, the Saints have finished in the top 10 in points allowed per game in each of the past 3 years. And this all goes into why people believe they could make serious noise this year. And when you factor in a -11 turnover margin last year and how many bad situations the defense was in, to still come out top 10 in points allowed per game is incredible. And what I want remembered here is that Marquise Haynes touchdown against the Panthers, or an Isaiah Simmons pick 6 against the Cardinals in week 7, well, those 14 points go into the total points allowed per game. And if those plays don't happen, the Saints defense would go from 9th in points allowed to 5th. And obviously you can do this with with every team, but that's more of a credit to the defense than it is anything, because they simply do not allow many points. And one thing the Saints did not do a great job of last year was hold the ball offensively, at least for a sustained time, as they finished 27th in average plays per drive and 21st in average time of possession. Obviously, you want to be in the upper half of the league because that means your defense is more energized throughout not only the game, but down the stretch of the year when the games matter more. And New Orleans finished 22nd in yards per carry offensively and 19th in rushing yards. This is despite finishing 14th in rushing attempts, meaning the Saints were trying to run the football, but a lot of the time couldn't get it going the way they wanted to. And they brought in a few running backs this offseason to try and address that by bringing in Jamal Williams in free agency and Kendre Miller in the draft. These guys won't propel New Orleans to the top 5 or anything like that, but they should do a better job than what Mark Ingram and even David Johnson did as the second backs last year. But one player I am extremely excited about in the offense is a guy I've been pretty vocal about for a while now, and it is second-year receiver Chris Olave. Chris is a very talented receiver and a guy who went for over 1,000 yards as a rookie last year, and people kind of forgot about him because he didn't have the 1,100 yards Garrett Wilson had, or the late surgence Brock Purdy had. So Olave, like a lot of other Saints in 2022, was kind of forgotten about, and now that he has improved quarterback play, I don't think it's unreasonable for Chris to have 12 or 1,300 yards this year, as he had over 1,000 as a rookie with, again, not great quarterback play. And while Saints fans are obviously excited about Derek Carr coming over this year from the Raiders, first off, I get it, as it's exciting to think you are legitimately competing for a Super Bowl. But what I'm interested to watch this year, and this is something I'll be really paying attention to, is Derek Carr has never had the type of help he will have this year in New Orleans. The Raiders' defenses during his time there, whether it was in Oakland or Las Vegas, were most of the time awful. And I'm not saying Derek Carr has to be a game manager to make things work this year for the Saints, but his role is not going to have to be to play as much hero ball as he has in years past. And I do want to address a kind of controversial player, and it's receiver Michael Thomas. Can't guard Mike, as he was once referred to, had a legendary first 4 years of his career, but as of now, that's it. And in the past 3 years, he's played 10 total games. I don't forget how good of a player he once was, but at the moment, I am out on Michael Thomas. If he comes back and plays at a high level, great and good for him and the Saints, but it's hard to convince yourself with any sort of certainty that this guy you hear a lot about but rarely actually see anymore is going to come back and be a great player. Again, he could, as we know the talent is certainly there, and we've seen that in years past, but I am much more invested into the success of receiver Chris Olave than I am a now 30-year-old Michael Thomas. But at this point in 2023, that's more of a hope than it is truly being able to rely on him. And I like what the Saints have in their tight end room, which is led by a player who broke out last year, and that's Juwan Johnson. Juwan finished second on the team in yards, of course behind Olave, but led the team in receiving touchdowns with 7, and if you told me now entering the year that Juwan would lead the team in receiving touchdowns again, I would not be surprised at all. He's a big-bodied player, as all tight ends are, duh, but Juwan is a former receiver, and when they get down in the red zone, he's going to be the guy Derek Carr looks first to more often than not. Why? Because he's faster than a lot of linebackers, and with the way the NFL is going, in terms of getting lighter on defense to be able to stop the passing game, that benefits big guys in offense because now Juwan also weighs more than a lot of players on the defense and weighs more players on the defense than he would have 10 years ago because the game is shifting. And granted, I would be surprised if he had double-digit touchdowns this year, but a 55-catch, 650-yard, 8-touchdown season for Juwan is completely realistic in this offense. And one thing that I think is a little overblown from a football standpoint is the Alvin Kamara suspension. Yes, he's not going to play for 3 games, but they're going to be fine in those first few weeks. And in those first few games, they play the Titans, in Carolina, and in Green Bay. And while those games won't be easy, they could certainly be a hell of a lot tougher. And when you take a look at the Saints' 2023 schedule, they have an extremely favorable schedule, as the toughest game they'll play this year will probably either be home against the Jags or in Minnesota to play the Vikings. And when those are your two toughest games for an entire 17-game season, you're sitting pretty, and that's an understatement. And just looking at the schedule even more, it's hard to find 7 losses for the Saints, especially when you factor in Derek Carr will probably throw for 4,000 yards and 26 or 27 touchdowns, meaning an improvement from last year. While Derek is not an elite quarterback or perfect player, a lot of his job is simply going to be do not throw us out of games like Jameis did a few times early in the year last year. Just get us to the fourth quarter and give us a chance. And for a player like Derek Carr that's dealt with bottom 5 defenses for most of his career, he's looking at this opportunity like a dog looks at a burger. This is what he's been dreaming about for years. And the Saints did not have a player finish with double-digit sacks in 2022, but collectively as a team they got to the quarterback, as believe it or not, they finished 5th as a team in sacks. And granted, they are going to have to replace the production from Caden Ellis and David Onyemata, but they selected Brian Brzee in the first round and Isaiah Foskey in the second round, and those are guys that could be rotational rushers early and develop as the year goes on. And Carl Granderson also added 5.5 sacks last year, who is back, so again, their pass rush is going to be solid. They are a pass rush by committee, and this defense goes hand in hand because the secondary, led of course by Lattimore, is a very good unit, and if you're not familiar with the term coverage sack, it applies to the Saints, which by the way is a compliment to how good their secondary is, more so than a diss at their pass rush. And speaking from a perspective of winning the division and getting back to the playoffs, the path is right in front of New Orleans this year. Tom Brady isn't in the division anymore, and hell, the Bucs only went 8-9 last year even with Tom on the roster. The other quarterbacks in the NFC South are Bryce Young, who I do believe will be a great quarterback over the course of time, Desmond Ridder, who is a true wild card, and Baker Mayfield, whose NFL future relies on his success this year. This is his last chance, and it's not an exaggeration to say, heading into the season, that Derek Carr is comfortably the best quarterback in this division, and the Saints' turnover margin should improve in a big way by playing these teams for 6 of their 17 games this year. Force young, inexperienced quarterbacks into uncomfortable situations and let your playmakers, defensive playmakers that is, like Lattimore, Marcus May, and Tyrann make plays on the ball. There is absolutely no reason for this team to only have 14 turnovers in 17 games like they did last year. And I know Dennis Allen obviously wasn't happy with 7 wins last year, but I would venture to say this was one of the things that drove him and kept him up late at night this offseason. Knowing he's a good defensive mind and knowing his team finished 3rd to last in turnovers forced last year. And that's one thing that will be heavily emphasized this year. Create turnovers and give our offenses short fields to work with. One player I will really be monitoring this year is second-year left tackle Trevor Penning, but the team MVP, breakout player, ceiling, and floor are on the screen, and I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as only about 24% of people watching are subscribed, and it makes a massive difference. Definitely check out Underdog Fantasy as you get a free $100 deposit match, and Derek Carr's season-long prop is 3,700 passing yards, which I would be extremely surprised if he doesn't hit that. But anyways, check that out with the link in the description. Again, free $100 deposit match. And until the next team preview, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.